As the Utah Utes gear up to play Cal Poly this weekend, one thing is clear. Devon Dampier has a chance to continue to fuel his Heisman campaign.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into this show, make sure you like and subscribe. We got a full show talking all things Utes today, but do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Just like there's more to every player, more dedication, more attention to detail, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Stay tuned later in the episode to highlight this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. My name is JT Wistrcill, and I'm excited to have on today's show Bryson Lester to preview the Utah Cal Poly game. Bryson works in the Big Sky Conference office as the Senior Director of Communications. Bryson, so great having you on. Appreciate you joining me. And as we dive into this game, we're going to talk about the Utah offense, how they've grown, also just the importance of, FCS. This is a Big Sky team in Cal Poly versus a P4 team. There's lots of conversation about that and how these games might be played moving forward. But Bryson, just want to start by talking about something that I think is true this week. I think Devon Dampier has a great chance to continue to fuel his Heisman campaign. He had nearly 300 total yards, and he did have 3 touchdowns last week against UCLA. I think with his dynamic and athletic ability, he has a chance. And he actually did lose to an FCS team last year. Montana State did beat him when he was at New Mexico. So I don't think Utah is going, and Kyle Whittingham does a good job, right? They don't take these programs lightly, even though there is a difference between P4 FCS. Like, you don't want to be that team that gets caught sleeping by the North Dakota States, which have happened many a time before. But I do believe Devon Dampier has a chance to put up some really strong numbers in this game and continue to elevate his play. With Utah being a top 25 team, I feel like you do see a slight start of that Heisman push for him because of those numbers. I think he's got a chance to continue to fuel that push this week. What do you think of that?
Yeah, you took the first bullet point right out of my mouth. The first time I watched Devon Dampier was against Montana State last year in week 0. And despite not being able to win that game, ultimately I left it really impressed with him. Yeah, and on the other side was touchdown Tommy Mellott, who ended up being drafted in the 5th round of the NFL draft, just signed with the New Orleans Saints. So it was a really fun quarterback battle in that game. And then, as the season went along, you couldn't have found a bigger fan of Devon Dampier than me. And then just being able to watch him navigate that offense against UCLA, I was watching with my dad, and I turned to him midway through the 3rd quarter, and I was like, I don't think I've seen them have a negative play. And it was just because of his elusive ability and his ability to get out of the pocket and make something out of nothing. And absolutely, games like this, a bye game, as we call them on our end, certainly an opportunity for him to stack up some numbers. And on the flip side of that, for sure, an opportunity for QB 2, 3, and maybe even 4 on the depth chart to potentially get some run, depending on how it plays out. You never know. These games can be close late, or they can get away from you early, but certainly an opportunity for Devon Dampier the next 2 weeks to put up some big numbers.
Yeah, there's been different scenarios when it comes to Utah versus FCS teams. I look at last year, Southern Utah game, Cam Rising's first game back. The Utah offense looked incredible in the first half. Brandon Keithy had 3 touchdowns. Starters did not play in the second half at all. Then there was that weird game a couple years ago. It's actually still when I was a student intern at Utah, where there was a lightning delay, but right before the lightning delay, now NFL receiver Rashid Shaheed took a touchdown, a kickoff return back, and Weber State actually led at the time of the lightning delay. So Utah went on to win that one still, obviously, too. And Cal Poly also is not. I mentioned a North Dakota State, even what a Weber State was back then. Cal Poly picked to finish towards the bottom of the Big Sky Conference, according to the preseason poll. But those are preseason rankings, and things can change and evolve quickly. You mentioned, this has a chance to be a bye game for Utah. What can you tell us about this Cal Poly team? Do you think they are a team that can try and make things interesting when coming up to Salt Lake City? What do you make of this team?
I certainly think they can. I pulled the last 5 times a Big Sky team has played at Utah. The average score was actually 36-10. So Utah's not typically blowing out Big Sky teams. They're winning the games. They haven't necessarily been close late, but they're not blowing Big Sky teams out. I think for sure Cal Poly, they opened their season with a 41-17 win over San Diego. Went up 24-0 to start that game, so a pretty quick start for them. as you mentioned, they were picked 11th out of our league. We have 12 teams. Portland State was picked 10th. I'm sure BYU fans are pretty familiar. Utah fans are pretty familiar with the result.
There's BYU fans
had
watching this. I've learned enough at this point. There's BYU fans always watching this too. So please continue.
For sure. But the Cal Poly team, I came away really impressed with their week 1 performance. Stop me if you've heard this before, but they had a transfer quarterback start game 1. So, Ty Diefenbach, he comes from Pitt. He actually said on an interview this week that Utah recruited him out of high school, ultimately didn't offer him, but he completed 18 passes for over 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. Those 2 touchdowns were to wide receiver Michael Briscoe, who was on our preseason all-conference team. A really elusive receiver, has a really good build. Definitely the type of guy that, could, turn some heads at Rice-Eccles Stadium on Saturday by making a couple people miss on an opening drive or something like that. So certainly, a lot of momentum for this Cal Poly team coming out of this first game, especially for a team that's really looking to go over 500 for the first time in pretty much a decade. So feeling pretty good about what we saw out of week 1 from them.
Yeah, you mentioned Ty, Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week with what he was able to do. And, they lost to San Diego last year. So the fact that they were able to beat them in week 1 this year is an encouraging sign for them. I think, Bryson, you mentioned the quarterback, the receiver, some of the things there. I think the real problem that Cal Poly is going to have in this game, and why I do think Utah is going to win in a pretty big fashion, is this offensive line, unfortunately, and even the defensive line with how they looked last week, right? No one, according to Pro Football Focus, generated more pressures in the country last week than John Henry Daly. And I think the highest graded, well, at least on the season, last season, was Spencer Fano. And then I think he still had a very high grade last week. Just Utah's talent in the trenches. There are some finesse teams at the P4 level that I do think, Arizona a couple years ago, I would classify as that when North Dakota State was able to get them. But to me, it's just really hard to beat a team like Utah because of the size and the strength they play with in the trenches, especially as we said too, like Cal Poly was good last week, but we still don't know if they even have the top trench talent in the Big Sky Conference.
Yeah, they had some really clean pockets offensively against San Diego. They were doing a really good job. Offensive line looked really good. They did a good job utilizing those quick passes, even though they had pretty clean pockets. And I think they're going to have to utilize those quick passes a lot more against that Utah defensive front, because even what they were doing against UCLA, they were getting pressure on Nico almost immediately, a lot of times flushing him out of the pocket. Cal Poly did run some option here and there that, they put on film that I'm sure Utah's paying some attention to this week, which was good to see that work for them. And then, you mentioned Utah's offensive line. Goodness gracious, they looked good in that opening game. The holes they were creating for those running backs was really impressive. And ultimately, you kind of alluded to it. That's kind of the difference you see in these games, right? Is Big Sky teams have a lot of talent. We have over 20 guys in the National Football League. Like, the top end talent is there. It's just kind of when you get into the trenches and when you get into the depth in the second and third team, that's kind of where the differences show. And so, the line play for Utah specifically being so good on both ends is certainly, for a team like Cal Poly, a concern.
It's an uphill battle. Cal Poly clearly improved from last season. Kyle Whittingham, Utah, they do a great job not taking anyone lightly. So, and especially as we mentioned too, with Devon Dampier just losing to a FCS team last season, I think he's going to be fully aware of, okay, hey, especially a Big Sky team, which let's not forget, Bryson, you compiled some amazing stats leading into this show. The Big Sky has earned more upsets over FBS foes than any other FCS conference since 2021. So that's incredibly impressive what the Big Sky is able to do. They can play with some of these big dogs. Idaho scared Oregon so bad last year. Like, that was a game. It was 24-14, and it was only 14-0 at the half. It was a touchdown game entering the fourth quarter. Like, this is what Big Sky teams are capable of. So Utah will not be sleeping in this game, especially with how Ty looked last week, their quarterback. And it's going to be interesting to see what this game ends up looking like too. Any final thoughts on this matchup, Bryson?
Yeah, just excited, like I mentioned, to see how Diefenbach plays against, this Utah defense. Their secondary is obviously stacked. But if he can lay some groundwork here of, put some really good things on film against a Utah defense, like, that's great for him. As I mentioned, I'm really high on Michael Briscoe, the wide receiver. I think Utah fans will come away pretty impressed with him. And yeah, I think, the last time a Big Sky team beat a Big 12 team was 2006. It was Montana State at Colorado. So it's been a little while, but I think, as you mentioned, we have the most FBS upsets in the last 10 years, and it's any given Saturday. Like these games are going to get played for a reason. And you mentioned the Idaho-Oregon game last year. Even I, going into that game, didn't expect much. But then Jason Eck, who's at New Mexico now, did a great job, had a great game plan. And so you just never know. And it's all about how the prep is. And as you mentioned, Kyle Whittingham, they don't blow Big Sky teams out at Utah, but they don't often feel particularly close.
Yeah, I think that Utah will take care of business this weekend, win pretty handedly, but you always got to be careful against these teams, especially coming off a good performance. If Utah's although always a team risks feeling themselves and then making mistakes and making those errors. But I don't believe that's going to be the case because of this Utah offense. But what's changed with this Utah offense from last year? That's what we're going to dive into in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Upside. Hey, Locked On Utes fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Stop leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with this free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. You can use my limited promo code FOOTBALL, all caps, no spaces, and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just for buying the gas you already needed. At first, I thought it was too good to be true, but it's totally legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commutes, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Don't let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using my limited promo code FOOTBALL for any limited 25-cent per gallon bonus. That's the promo code FOOTBALL. Disclaimer, this offer may vary based on location. You can go to upside.com for terms and conditions when you visit Upside today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is also brought to you by our great friends at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive. And that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Mazda offers more than safety. It's won more 2025 IHS Top Safety Pick Awards than anyone else. Also, you can feel it the moment you get behind the wheel. The smooth handling, intuitive controls, and standard all-wheel drive in every crossover SUV. Whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend road trip or game day trip, Mazda makes every drive feel special. It's the small details that make the big plays, and just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved when you get a Mazda today. Bryson, this Utah offense feels different. And that was something that was so refreshing to see against UCLA. There were so many different aspects that I loved. From the very first play, as I said last on the live show right after, Wayshawn Parker being motioned out of the backfield, RB1 throwing a massive block on a screen, but not just any wide receiver, Smith Snowden. And the way that he was involved in this game plan. I loved how many different people were involved in the game plan for Utah. I loved the creative ways Utah found to get them the ball, whether it was just with screens, on jet sweeps, like the misdirection, constantly something happening to confuse a defense, extra offensive linemen, putting players in positions to succeed, the constant use of motion too, just in general, to cause defenses to shift and do different things. I loved what Utah did offensively, and I'm really excited to see another week of this Jason Beck-led offense because I think it's going to be pretty special this year for Utah.
Yeah, it was really entertaining. When I went to bed and I was kind of thinking back on the game, I was like, that was the most fun I'd had watching a Utah offense in a long time. And I kind of pinpointed maybe even just the Rose Bowl against Ohio State was the last time I had that much fun watching a Utah offense. It felt so different, so fluid. I really like the game plan Jason Beck had for them to just go down the field immediately and get that score. I'm sure Utah fans, it was just kind of like a weight was lifted off everybody's shoulders when they saw that first touchdown be scored, and the momentum kept going. And, you see Devon Dampier on the HEISMAN podcast this week, just all these things that are happening that are building this positive momentum. It's really exciting to see. And, especially after, a year of headlines that were so negative, to see the offense be so highly touted for a week was really cool.
And it feels legit. Like I'm not trying to overact to one game. I know I'm talking about Devon Dampier as a Heisman guy, but with how he looked, 300 total yards on the road against a P4 team, his first ever game there. When you look at how many other quarterbacks and teams struggled, and yes, UCLA is not amazing. Utah is going to play a lot better teams than that. But because of this offensive line that he's behind, he will always have time and he will always have a run game to me because of the amount of playmakers we saw step up. There doesn't need to be a guy who it's like, oh, you just shut him down and it's over. Utah's multiple guys that can win and get open. And it's going to be different guys too that are capable of doing that. Guys who make people miss, a really good 1-2 punch in the backfield, and that dynamic quarterback with your same offensive coordinator for Dampier that he was with last year. And that offensive coordinator proven success because he did lead the 4th best offense on a yards per game basis a season ago. Bryson, people love to throw out his record. If his defense held all of their opponents last year under 20 points per game, he would have been 10-2 last season. And it feels like that's very much on the table for Utah this year because they have that defense, and this offense to me does feel sustainable.
Yeah, and you mentioned the defensive guys coming in and getting those snaps on offense, which is just such a fascinating wrinkle and just something on film that the opposing team has to spend so much time working on. So, okay, when Smith Soden comes in, what is he going to do? Where's he lining up? So those wrinkles are really fascinating. What I also really liked seeing was when Dampier was moving out of the pocket, the buy-in from the offensive line to continue moving with him and to continue picking up those blocks as he's scrambling, because, that's such a part of having a quarterback like that, if you're doing that on your own, it can be really challenging. But if you're doing that with an offensive line that's with you and bought in, that's when those opportunities really are made. And so it was really exciting to see that on some of his bigger scampers when he kind of, started veering out of the pocket and you start getting kind of nervous, but then you see the offensive line move and shift with him and get some blocks and, create a lane for him to pick up some positive momentum.
And that's what he did. So much positive momentum for this Utah team. I remember this summer at Big 12 Media Days, I asked Spencer Fano what it's like playing in Jason Beck's offense. And he said fun. And you could see it in his eyes. And after watching the first game, I totally see why. He's got offensive linemen pulling. We mentioned the extra guys that are in as well. We got 300-pound fullbacks, basically, was what Utah's doing with some of these offensive linemen. It's crazy to watch. And I still remember, I think the one you were referencing to is the one where Dampier rolls out to the right and a UCLA defender actually gets a hand on his back, but you can't grab him. And Dampier barely gets out of it. But there are other Utah offensive linemen, like right after that, they're there blocking for their quarterback. They believe in Devon Dampier. Kyle Whittingham said he's a very good leader, and that was evident right away. And speaking of Dampier, going back to him really quickly, Bryson, you mentioned you watched him in the first game and got to see him play as well throughout the season. You heard about the offseason hype. For me, I feel like the biggest point of improvement I've seen from Dampier, at least one game in so far, was a decision-making. I did not feel like he put the ball in harm's way very frequently. There's a reason he completed most of his passes. Like, yes, Utah designed their offense maybe not to put him in dangerous positions, and they got up, but I thought his decision-making has grown a lot from last year. Maybe even especially from that first game. Bryson, when you did get to see him go against Montana State, how has Devon Dampier evolved as a quarterback?
Well, his decision-making is really on point because today he announced a NIL partnership with Canes. So, that's maybe the best decision he's made yet. No, I mean, you really nailed that. I think, really having the spring at Utah probably was so big for him to be able to be healthy and to go through all that and to be able to get all those reps. And, to have the offensive line he does allows him more time to process. Even if it's half a second more than he was getting at New Mexico, that's half a second he has more to process and get through his reads and decide if he's going to get out. Because you mentioned against Montana State last year, there was a couple decisions that it was just kind of like, oh, but you even saw it get better as the New Mexico season went along, and through one game at Utah, at least, it was flawless. Like I said earlier, it felt like they didn't even have a negative play for the 3.5 quarters I watched. So I think the way he's seeing the game this year as opposed to last year is a huge improvement.
I totally agree. And I think there's still so much potential for this Utah offense. I mentioned not just sustaining, but even improvements, I would say as well. And yes, 18 for 16, all of that as well. I'm just saying in the grand scheme of things, Utah will just have to continue to elevate their play in order to beat the best teams they are going to face this season. And I think you can see that in getting Larry Simmons more involved, right? He slips in the end zone. He would have had the touchdown. He stepped out of bounds one other time. Tobias Merriweather only gets 2 targets, and even one of them was technically waved off because it was pass interference. Like, there's more room to grow and get these other guys involved. Love what I saw from Dallin Bell Bentley. I mean, JJ Buchanan being a freshman playing as much as he has is a massive testament to him. He's only going to grow and continue to get better. But it is so much fun watching these defensive guys out there. Like Jackson Benny runs a really nice route for his one reception. Lander Barton looks good in the end zone. I think he's going to be used in a Caleb Lohner type role I've talked about. I think we're going to see him a lot in red zone packages because that's size and strength. But even as Smith Snowden, just so elusive, Bryson, there are so many guys that Utah can feed the ball to. And that just has me incredibly excited because in years past, it feels like it's only been, maybe 6 skill position guys in total that Utah's really relying on. And that number's definitely grown this year.
Yeah, and they have a couple guys they're pretty high on that didn't even see the field, right, in this opening UCLA game. So, yeah, I think to have that many weapons, and it was kind of funny on the flip side, seeing UCLA's big plays being made by Mikey Matthews and Anthony Woods, who were on the roster. Anthony Woods was an Idaho guy, so really familiar with his game. So it was kind of funny to see the flip side of that, where the guys that were on Utah's roster were making the plays for UCLA, but then the guys that Utah replaced them with were really just having phenomenal games. And that really just kind of speaks to where we're at with college football right now is, these guys are just going to flip around all the time. And, the sooner we all accept that, the better we're all off. But that was an interesting part of the game to me to see that happen.
I totally agree. And just speaking of all the change and turnover in college football, I want to talk about if these games are going to remain. What I mean is FCS versus P4. What value do they add to FCS teams? Are they worth it for P4 teams to continue to play them when we hear more talk of maybe SEC and Big Ten trying to separate? That's the conversation we're diving into in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Utah, I'm going Devon Dampier. We just talked about him, but almost 300 yards in his debut, 3 touchdowns, silenced a lot of his critics and looked like one of the best QBs in the Big 12. I even might say college football. He delivered in a massive way in so many third downs. He's part of the biggest reasons Utah was 16 for 18 too. Like, he came through. I mean, he was on an absolute streak and a tear against UCLA. And just like Devon Dampier delivered for the Utah Utes, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You can save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms do apply. Promo period will continue to go through into November. So make sure you guys head over to DoorDash today, build your streak, and eat some great food along the way. Change is a certainty in the current world of college football. So much has evolved with rosters and even future schedule talk and everything. So, Bryson, one thing that was even talked about Big 12 Media Day is like, hey, future scheduling opponents and teams and things of that way. There's part of me, Bryson, that in terms of would I rather Utah play an FCS team this weekend or play another P4 team? I would be more excited if Utah was playing a P4 team this weekend. But these games have incredible value when you're talking about reps for the red shirts, also just tune-up weeks before you get to Big 12 play, and that's not mentioning the added value for an FCS team. What do these games do for FCS programs, Bryson?
Yeah, they're incredibly important. And as the conversation continues to trend towards, more conference games for P4s and for playing other P4s exclusively, those kind of conversations are concerning at this level of college football. Mm-hmm. For an FCS team, Cal Poly will come in, they'll get their $500,000 plus to play this game. Not sure what the exact number is. But that money,
it's $500,000. That's what you mentioned. Like, it's $500,000. That's insane for a college athletic department. And
at this level, that's everything. That could be what, for example, I don't know this for example or for certain, but for like that kind of money can be used to pay for charter flights for all of their conference games. It gets reinvested right into the program. So these types of games are very important for teams at our level. A lot of times you'll see teams play multiple bye games in 1 year, just depending on what the budget concerns are. So these games are very important. And I think, at our level, we're certainly fighting to make sure they don't go away. Because they're vital to inject, some money and life into FCS football programs for sure.
And I think that's why I always come back to, I do want these games to continue. I wish this is where I would love a college football commissioner. I wish it was mandated. We're starting to get to the point where everyone's playing 9 conference games. I think that is a good step in the right direction. I feel like everyone should play a FCS team, a group of 5 team, and then another P4 team in your non-conference before you roll into your conference play, because these games do add so much tremendous value. And it's also just fun stories, incredible memories. Like those guys from last year, I know Oregon players will try to do everything they can to forget it, but guys at Idaho, even just getting close like that, you never forget it. And Bryson, like, I mean, just walk me through, we talked about those, how many teams since 2021 have upset P4 teams too. Like, just what does that do, that moment, the memory for those players when they do get over that hump?
It's everything. And, I mentioned it earlier, Ty Diefenbach from Cal Poly, he was recruited by Utah. There's going to be a lot of those stories, not so much with this game specifically, but when Utah's played Southern Utah in the past, that team has a lot of Utah kids on the roster. Those games mean a lot to them to be able to play them. And, when you think back on, some of your favorite upsets in college football you've ever watched, like you think of that App State Michigan game, when Michigan had all this momentum and App State goes in and blocks the field goal. And, those types of games. The first year I worked for the Big Sky Conference, Washington was ranked and Montana went there and won. Like those are program changing wins. Those are, wins that get you on the national stage. You look at James Madison, right? Like James Madison this year could potentially be the G5 representative in the college football playoff. A few years ago, they were an FCS team because they picked up a lot of these, FBS wins, and they were able to make a lot of noise in the FCS playoff. They were able to make the jump and get in, and now they're a legitimate contender. We do little projections in our office of, who's going to make the playoff field. And I picked James Madison because I felt like, they have a really good roster and they're really well coached. So, the FCS product, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there's a lot of good players here. And you see that every year in the NFL draft. You'll see some players from Cal Poly this weekend that are going to get training camp invites and potentially, have a chance to make an NFL roster. They had their first guy in a long time this year make an NFL roster. Elijah Ponder is going to play for the New England Patriots this year. So, there's a lot of talent at this level for sure.
Cooper Kupp, Damian Lillard, Kendrick Bourne. You just mentioned Tommy as well too, Bryson. I mean, Carson Wentz went to North Dakota State. Like those are just some of the Big Sky guys as mentioned as well. There's been so many guys that have come through FCS programs, gone on to have great success too. And college football, the NCAA, I know there's so much just going on to change and everything, but it is cool that college football, like the fact that we still get the NCAA tournament where these teams get to play each other. I don't want to lose that element. I don't want the sport to become even more fractured and separated than it already is in some ways too. So I'm hoping these games can stay together. I'm hoping we continue to play them year in and year out. Utah's played a lot of these Big Sky schools, Weber State, Idaho, Cal Poly this year, as we mentioned too. So I hope it's something that continues and that we get to continue to see moving forward as well. But it's an ever evolving and changing world of college athletics, and we're just gonna have to do our best to keep our eye on it. But Bryson, we don't get Pac-12 after dark anymore, but you can on ESPN Plus get some incredible Big Sky football games late. So please give us the promo of why people should be tuning in to watch some more Big Sky action this fall.
Absolutely. Big Sky After Dark. We kind of, we took the moniker. I'm sure they'll want it back in a year, but we've got 4 nationally televised conference games this year. 2 will be on a Friday night. So those games will be on ESPN, ESPN2. So we're really excited about those. Like I mentioned, it's a high level of football. You watch a game played at Montana or Montana State, the atmosphere there is as good as anywhere you're going to find in the country, to be completely honest. And it's a lot better than you're going to find at a lot of G5 places. As I mentioned, we got a lot of talent here. We got a lot of really passionate fan bases. You're talking about Montana, Montana State, Idaho. These are all state schools. These are some of the biggest schools out there. And, a lot of the schools you've been seeing have a lot of success at the G5 level. Your Boise States, your James Madisons, they were FCS teams at one point. So, the elevator pitch is college football. We had Pat Forty at our kickoff event up in Spokane, Washington. And on our live show, he said, it just kind of felt like real college football still. Kind of the P4 products become a little more corporate. All these guys are making a lot of money. At our level, the guys are making money, but, it still feels like college football at the FCS level. So
It does. And you mentioned G5, Bryson. I'm sorry to do this to Duke, but like I went to a Duke football game last week. You want to go to a Montana State, like Weber State, any of those games, and compared to a Duke football atmosphere, not even close. The FCS, Big Sky deliver incredible, passionate fan bases, like you said, in some ways, what college football was built and founded on in its tradition as well. And make sure you guys give the Big Sky a follow on X as well. And head over and give Bryson a follow on X too. Bryson, always a blast getting to hop on and do this with you, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, JT. Appreciate you.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. If you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football, Locked On Big 12, have you covered as we get up for week 2 of the college football season. That's going to do it up for our show today. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Utes, I'll be back predicting which Utah players are in for big days against the Mustangs. We'll see you tomorrow.